Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Before the Fall. Wilson Steele had built his life on precision. As a former military intelligence officer turned cybersecurity consultant, he understood that details mattered, that one overlooked vulnerability could bring down entire systems. But nothing had prepared him for the vulnerability that would destroy his world on a Tuesday morning in October. The day started like any other in their suburban Portland home. Lindsay Steele, his wife of 15 years, was preparing breakfast while their 12-year-old daughter, Ashley, practiced piano in the living room. Ashley had inherited her mother's grace and her father's determination, evident in how she attacked each piece with focused intensity. "Dad, listen to this," Ashley called out, launching into a complex Mozart sonata. Her fingers danced across the keys with the kind of natural talent that made Wilson's chest swell with pride. Wilson had met Lindsay during his final year in the Army. She was a nurse at Walter Reed, and he was recovering from training injury. What started as professional care had blossomed into something deeper when she stayed after her shift to talk about books and dreams. Lindsay had seen something in the battle-hardened intelligence officer that others missed, a gentleness beneath the tactical mind. They'd built their life methodically. Wilson transitioned his military skills into the private sector, founding Steele Security Solutions. The company specialized in protecting corporations from cyber threats, and Wilson's reputation for identifying weaknesses before they could be exploited had made him wealthy. Lindsay continued nursing part-time at Portland General Hospital, finding fulfillment in helping people heal. Ashley was their miracle. After years of trying and multiple miscarriages, Lindsay had given birth to their daughter when she was 38. They'd nicknamed Ashley their little warrior because she'd fought to come into the world, and she'd been fighting to excel at everything ever since. "That was beautiful, sweetheart," Wilson said, kissing the top of Ashley's head. Her dark hair smelled like the lavender shampoo Lindsay insisted on using. "Your recital next month is going to be incredible." Ashley beamed up at him with Lindsay's green eyes. "Mrs. Peterson says I might be ready for the state competition next year." The pain hit Ashley during math class. It started as a dull ache in her lower back, then intensified until she couldn't sit upright. The school nurse called Lindsay, who rushed Ashley to Portland General, the hospital where she worked, where she trusted the staff like family. Dr. Ernest Lim, Ashley's pediatrician since birth, was concerned about the symptoms. The pain, combined with slight weakness in Ashley's left leg, warranted immediate investigation. An MRI revealed a spinal tumor, benign, but positioned dangerously close to crucial nerves. "We need to remove it," Dr. Lim explained to Wilson and Lindsay in his office. "It's pressing against the spinal cord. If we wait, she could lose function permanently." The referral was to Dr. Victor Olson, Portland General's chief of neurosurgery. Olson had an impressive reputation. Harvard-educated, published researcher, department head for 8 years. The hospital's marketing materials featured his photograph prominently, showcasing their world-class surgical team. Wilson's research into Olson revealed an impeccable record. Board certifications, speaking engagements at medical conferences, published papers in prestigious journals. The man was supposedly at the top of his profession. "He's the best," Dr. Lim assured them. "If anyone can remove that tumor safely, it's Victor Olson." The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. Ashley faced the prospect with typical courage, more concerned about missing her piano lessons than the operation itself. "Will I still be able to play after?" she asked Dr. Olson during their consultation. Olson barely looked up from his tablet. "Fine motor skills shouldn't be affected. We're nowhere near those neural pathways." Wilson noted the surgeon's dismissive tone, but attributed it to clinical professionalism. Surgeons dealt with life and death daily. Perhaps emotional distance was necessary. The night before surgery, Wilson sat on Ashley's bed as she practiced finger exercises in the air, her hands moving as if playing an invisible piano. "I'm scared, Dad," she whispered. Wilson took her small hands in his. "Fear is normal, little warrior, but you're stronger than you know. And Dr. Olson has done this surgery hundreds of times." Will you be there when I wake up? I'll be the first face you see, Wilson promised. He had no way of knowing it would be the last promise he could keep in the way she'd expect. The surgery began at 7 a.m. sharp. Wilson and Lindsay waited in the family lounge, surrounded by other families facing their own crises. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. What should have been a 3-hour procedure stretched into 5, then 6. When Dr. Olson finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs, his face was unreadable. Wilson's intelligence training kicked in automatically, analyzing micro-expressions and body language. Something was wrong. There were complications, Olson said without preamble. The tumor was more adherent to the spinal cord than we anticipated. There was some unavoidable neural tissue disruption. What does that mean? Lindsay's voice was barely a whisper. Ashley is stable, but there's been damage to the spinal cord. She's experiencing paralysis from the waist down. It may be temporary, but the words hit Wilson like a sniper's bullet. Sudden, devastating, changing everything in an instant. Lindsay collapsed into a chair, her face drained of color. How was that possible? Wilson's voice was deadly calm. You said this was routine. Medicine isn't an exact science, Mr. Steele. Sometimes outcomes are unpredictable despite our best efforts. But Wilson's trained, I caught something in Olson's manner. A slight tremor in his hands, averted eye contact, defensive posturing. These weren't the signs of a surgeon dealing with an unfortunate but unavoidable complication. These were the signs of someone hiding something. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Ashley lay in the ICU, her small body dwarfed by machines and monitors. The lower half of her body was motionless, covered by sterile white sheets that might as well have been a burial shroud for the life she'd known. Wilson hadn't left her side for 3 days. He held her hand, read to her, and maintained a steady stream of encouragement even when she was unconscious. Lindsay alternated between Ashley's bedside and the hospital chapel, praying to a God she was beginning to doubt. When Ashley finally woke fully, the moment Wilson had been dreading arrived. Dad, I can't feel my legs, she said with heartbreaking confusion. Why can't I feel my legs? Wilson's training had taught him to compartmentalize, to separate emotion from mission objectives. But watching his daughter try to move legs that would never again carry her to a piano bench shattered every wall he'd built around his heart. There was damage during surgery, sweetheart. The doctors are working on it. Will I walk again? The question was asked with such innocent hope that Wilson had to excuse himself to the hallway before he broke down completely. Dr. Lim visited that evening, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by professional gravity. The MRI shows extensive damage to the L1, L3 vertebrae region. The paralysis appears to be permanent. Appears to be? Lindsay seized on the qualifier like a lifeline. In cases like this, if there's no improvement in the first 72 hours, Dr. Lim's voice trailed off. It's been 4 days, Wilson said flatly. Dr. Lim nodded. I'm so sorry. I've requested a full case review. Sometimes we can learn from these situations. That night, alone in Ashley's room while Lindsay tried to get a few hours of sleep at home, Wilson began his investigation. His laptop connected to the hospital's guest Wi-Fi, and muscle memory took over. Years of military intelligence work had taught him how to find information others prefer to keep hidden. He started with Dr. Victor Olson's professional history, going deeper than his initial research. Public records, medical board filings, court documents. What he found made his blood run cold. Olson had faced 3 malpractice suits in the past 5 years. All had been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. But Wilson knew how to look beyond the official records. Cross-referencing dates with local news reports, hospital staff changes, and insurance filings painted a disturbing picture. A 63-year-old retired teacher named Joan Hammond had died during what should have been routine spine surgery. Her family's wrongful death suit mentioned surgical errors and failure to follow standard protocols. A 34-year-old construction worker named Randy Brock had been left partially paralyzed after Olson attempted to remove a herniated disc. The settlement was reported as substantial in a sealed court filing. Most disturbing was the case of 8-year-old Preston Liu, who'd suffered permanent brain damage during a pediatric tumor removal. The family had moved to Seattle afterward, but Wilson found a brief mention in a medical journal about complications arising from non-standard surgical approaches. Each case shared common elements: complex procedures simplified in patient consultations, complications blamed on unforeseen circumstances, and families pressured to accept settlements with ironclad NDAs. Wilson's investigation deepened. Hospital records showed that Olson's complication rates were nearly double the national average for neurosurgeons, yet he'd never faced disciplinary action from the medical board. Someone was protecting him. The connection became clear when Wilson researched Portland General's board of directors. The hospital was owned by Cascade Health Systems, a corporation run by three powerful families who dominated Portland's medical establishment for decades. Victor Olson's father-in-law was Maurice Melton, the hospital's chief legal counsel and a man whose political connections reached into the governor's office. Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Alan Garner. Saw the news about Ashley. If you need anything, call me. The company can run itself for as long as you need. Alan had served with Wilson in Army intelligence before joining Steel Security Solutions as chief technology officer. Their partnership went beyond business. Alan was one of the few people who understood Wilson's particular skill set. The next morning, Dr. Olson made his rounds with typical arrogance. He breezed into Ashley's room, trailing a group of residents, barely acknowledging the family whose life he'd destroyed. "Recovery is progressing well," he announced to his students. "The patient is stable, and rehabilitation can begin soon." "What about her legs?" Lindsay asked desperately. "Physical therapy will help her adapt to her new circumstances," Olson replied without looking at Ashley. "Children are remarkably resilient." Wilson watched his daughter's face crumble as the reality hit her. She would never walk again, never dance, never stand at a piano to perform. Her dreams had been amputated as surely as her mobility. After the medical team left, Wilson followed Olson into the hallway. "Doctor, I'd like to discuss Ashley's case in private." Olson glanced at his watch impatiently. "I'm doing surgery. Whatever questions you have can wait." "Actually, they can't." Wilson's voice carried the quiet authority that had commanded respect in military briefings. "My daughter's paralysis resulted from surgical negligence. I want to know what you're going to do about it." For the first time, Olson looked directly at Wilson. His expression shifted from dismissal to barely concealed hostility. "Mr. Steele, I understand you're upset, but medicine involves risks. Your daughter's outcome, while unfortunate, falls within acceptable parameters for this type of procedure." "Acceptable parameters?" Wilson's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes made Olson take a step back. "My 12-year-old daughter will never walk again because you made a mistake. There's nothing acceptable about that. If you have concerns about her care, you're welcome to discuss them with our patient advocacy department." Olson turned to leave, then paused. "But I should warn you that making unfounded accusations against hospital staff could be considered harassment." Wilson smiled, the same cold smile that had preceded successful interrogations in places whose names were still classified. "Doctor, you have no idea what harassment looks like, but you're about to learn." That evening, Wilson met with Ralph Bates, a malpractice attorney Allen had recommended. Bates reviewed Ashley's medical records with growing concern. "This doesn't look right," Bates admitted. "The surgical notes are unusually sparse, and there's no mention of the specific technique used. Most concerning is that the damage pattern doesn't match what we'd expect from the described complications." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Dr. Olson may have deviated from standard surgical protocol. Whether through incompetence or negligence, I can't yet determine." "What's our next step?" "I'll file a formal complaint with the medical board and begin discovery proceedings. But I have to warn you, Olson has powerful friends. These cases can drag on for years, and there's no guarantee of success." Wilson nodded, but his mind was already working beyond legal remedies. He'd spent 20 years learning how to identify enemies, exploit their weaknesses, and neutralize threats. Dr. Victor Olson had made a fatal error in judgment. He'd hurt Wilson Steele's family and assumed there would be no consequences. He was about to discover how wrong he could be. Chapter 3. Lines Drawn. 2 weeks after Ashley's surgery, the Steele family had settled into a heartbreaking new routine. Wilson had converted the first floor of their home into a makeshift rehabilitation center, installing ramps and grab bars while Lindsay learned to manage Ashley's care. Ashley faced each day with courage that humbled her parents, working through physical therapy exercises with grim determination. But Wilson saw how she turned away when they passed her and used piano, how she stared out the window at neighborhood kids riding bikes and playing soccer. "I want to go back to school," Ashley announced one morning over breakfast. "Are you sure you're ready?" Lindsay asked gently. "I can't hide forever, and I need to see my friends." Wilson admired his daughter's resilience, even as it broke his heart. She was learning to navigate a world that had suddenly become hostile to her existence, full of barriers and limitations that hadn't existed before. The return to school was devastating. Wilson watched through the car window as Ashley wheeled herself toward the entrance, her shoulders set with false bravado. Other children stared with curious cruelty that only kids could master. By lunchtime, the school nurse was calling. Ashley had locked herself in the bathroom, sobbing. That night, after Ashley had finally fallen asleep, Wilson found Lindsay crying in their bedroom. "She asked me why God would let this happen to her," Lindsay whispered. "What am I supposed to tell her?" Wilson held his wife, feeling her shake with the force of her grief. "We tell her that sometimes bad things happen to good people, but we don't let them define us." "How can you be so calm about this? Our daughter's life has been destroyed." "I'm not calm," Wilson said quietly. "I'm focused." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Maurice Melton, Portland General's chief legal counsel, stood on their doorstep wearing an expensive suit and a practiced expression of sympathy. "Mr. and Mrs. Steele, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to speak with you about Ashley's case." Wilson invited him in, but didn't offer coffee. In the living room, surrounded by Ashley's rehabilitation equipment, Melton looked like a vulture surveying a fresh kill. "First, let me express the hospital's deepest sympathies for your family's situation. What happened to Ashley is truly tragic." "What happened to Ashley was malpractice," Wilson said bluntly. Melton's expression didn't change. "I understand you've hired Ralph Bates. Ralph's a good attorney, but these medical cases can be challenging. The science is complex. Outcomes are often unpredictable. Get to the point. Portland General would like to make a settlement offer. It's generous, enough to cover Ashley's long-term care, modifications to your home, specialized education. We're talking about a 7-figure sum." Wilson studied the lawyer's face. Melton was good. His expression showed just the right mixture of compassion and business pragmatism. But Wilson had interrogated professional liars in foreign prisons. He recognized the subtle signs of deception. "How generous?" Lindsay asked. $2 million, Melton said smoothly, plus ongoing medical coverage for Ashley through our extended care program. It was a substantial offer, more money than most families would see in a lifetime. But Wilson heard what Melton didn't say. In exchange, a standard non-disclosure agreement. No public statements about the case or Ashley's treatment. You want us to stay quiet about your surgeon's negligence. Melton's mask slipped slightly. "Mr. Steele, Dr. Olson is one of the finest neurosurgeons on the West Coast. This was an unfortunate outcome, but not the result of any wrongdoing. Then why offer a settlement at all? Because litigation is expensive and traumatic for families like yours. We prefer to resolve these matters privately." Wilson leaned forward. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Your finest neurosurgeon permanently paralyzed my 12-year-old daughter during what you described as routine surgery. Now you want to pay us to keep quiet about it. I think you're mischaracterizing. How many other families have you paid off?" Wilson's voice was deadly quiet. "How many other children has Olson damaged while you protected him?" Melton stood abruptly. "Mr. Steele, I came here hoping to help your family move forward, but I can see you're determined to pursue a difficult path. We'll take our chances with the legal system." Melton paused at the door. "The legal system can be unpredictable, Mr. Steele. Juries sometimes find that complications arise despite everyone's best efforts. It would be unfortunate if you put your family through years of litigation only to receive nothing. After Melton left, Lindsay turned to Wilson with uncertainty. $2 million would solve a lot of problems. Blood money, Wilson said. They're not offering that much out of generosity. They're scared. Of what? Of what they think I might find. Wilson's investigation had continued during Ashley's initial recovery. Using contacts from his military days and skills honed in corporate espionage prevention, he'd penetrated deeper into Portland General's internal systems than any outsider should have been able to reach. What he discovered made Melton's settlement offer look like panic money. Dr. Victor Olson had been drinking before Ashley's surgery. The discovery came through cross-referencing credit card records with hospital security footage. Olson had visited Murphy's Pub, a bar 3 blocks from the hospital, at 11:30 p.m. the night before surgery. He'd charged $47 worth of drinks to his card, enough for at least 4 double whiskeys based on the bar's pricing. Security cameras showed him entering the hospital at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Ashley's surgery began. His gait was steady, his appearance professional, but Wilson noticed what others had missed: the slight tremor in Olson's hands as he badged through the security entrance, the way he avoided direct eye contact with colleagues. Further investigation revealed a pattern. Olson's most serious complications clustered around periods when he'd visited Murphy's Pub the night before surgery. The bar's credit card records, obtained through methods Wilson preferred not to examine too closely, showed a troubling escalation in Olson's drinking over the past 2 years. But the most damning evidence came from the hospital's own internal systems. Olson's surgical reports from the day of Ashley's operation had been modified 3 times in the 12 hours following the procedure. Someone had gone back and changed the narrative, softening language about complications and removing references to specific surgical decisions. Wilson now understood why Melton had made such a generous settlement offer. They weren't just covering up negligence. They were covering up a surgeon who operated while impaired, protected by an institution that valued reputation over patient safety. That evening, Wilson made a phone call to Alan Garner. "I need your help," Wilson said simply. "Anything. You know that. How do you feel about taking down a hospital?" Alan was quiet for a moment. "Are we talking about something legal?" "We're talking about justice for Ashley. Everything else is negotiable. When do we start?" Wilson looked through the window at Ashley, who was attempting to transfer from her wheelchair to the couch by herself. Her face was set with concentration and stubborn determination. She was learning to fight with the hand she'd been dealt. It was time her father showed her how fighting was really done. Chapter 4: Gathering Intelligence. Wilson's investigation into Dr. Victor Olson and Portland General Hospital transformed from personal vendetta into military precision operation. He established a command center in his home office, installing encrypted servers and secure communication systems that would have impressed his former colleagues at Fort Bragg. Alan Garner proved invaluable. His expertise in cybersecurity provided access to digital footprints that revealed more than public records ever could. Together, they began mapping the network of corruption that had protected Olson for years. "Look at this," Alan said during one of their evening strategy sessions. His laptop displayed a complex web of financial transactions. Portland General's insurance payouts for malpractice settlements have tripled in the past 5 years, but their public reporting shows declining incident rates. Wilson studied the data. They're classifying settlements as general liability instead of malpractice. Makes Olson's record look clean. Gets worse. I found emails between Melton and the hospital's insurance carrier. They've been actively suppressing incident reports that might trigger medical board investigations. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption. Portland General wasn't just protecting one problem surgeon. They were operating a cover-up network that reached into the state medical board, insurance companies, and local media. Wilson's military training had taught him that successful operations required understanding the enemy's weaknesses. He began building detailed profiles of every player in the conspiracy. Dr. Victor Olson, age 48, had graduated from Harvard Medical School, but finished in the bottom third of his class. His residency at Johns Hopkins had been marked by several disciplinary actions, including one incident involving alcohol on hospital premises. Despite these red flags, he'd been hired by Portland General 8 years ago when his father-in-law, Maurice Melton, joined the hospital's legal team. Olson's marriage to Dolores Melton had produced 2 children, now teenagers at an elite Portland prep school. The family lived in a $3.2 million home in the West Hills, drove luxury cars, and vacationed in the Hamptons. Olson's annual salary was $650,000, but his lifestyle suggested income closer to $1.2 million annually. He's taking money from somewhere, Wilson observed, reviewing financial records Allen had obtained through methods that wouldn't hold up in court but didn't need to. Medical device kickbacks, Allen confirmed. I traced payments from 3 different companies. He's been recommending unnecessary hardware in spinal surgeries, collecting $15,000 per device implanted. Wilson felt pieces clicking into place. Ashley's surgery didn't require hardware, but his initial recommendation included spinal fusion with titanium rods, which you questioned, so he backed down. But he was probably counting on that $15,000 commission when he agreed to take the case. The corruption went deeper. Olson had financial stakes in 2 medical testing facilities and a rehabilitation center. Patients were routinely referred to these businesses without disclosure of Olson's ownership interests. Conservative estimates suggested he'd illegally profited by over $400,000 in the past year alone. But Wilson needed more than financial crimes to destroy Olson. He needed something that would shatter the man's carefully constructed facade and expose him for what he really was. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Casey Leonard, a former surgical nurse at Portland General, contacted Ralph Bates with information about Ashley's case. She's scared, Bates explained during their meeting. She signed an NDA when she left the hospital, but she says she can't stay quiet about what she saw. Casey Leonard was 34 years old, a single mother who'd worked in Portland General's neurosurgery department for 6 years. Her resignation letter, obtained through Allen's network penetration, cited irreconcilable differences with department policies and requested immediate release from all contracts. Wilson and Lindsay met Casey at a coffee shop in Beaverton, far from the hospital and anyone who might recognize her. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder and speaking in whispers. Dr. Olson was drunk the morning of your daughter's surgery, she said without preamble. I could smell alcohol on his breath during pre-op. Lindsay gasped, but Wilson remained calm. Did you report it? I tried to speak with the charge nurse, but she told me to mind my own business. Said Olson was under a lot of stress, and maybe I was imagining things. What did you see during the surgery? Casey's hands trembled as she described the operation. His coordination was off. He made the initial incision too deep, then tried to correct by going shallower. When he reached the tumor site, his hands were shaking. Why didn't you stop him? You don't understand the hierarchy in that, or Olson's like a god in there. Nobody questions him, ever. When things started going wrong, he got angry, started cursing at the residents. He blamed the tumor's positioning, said it was more complex than the scans showed. But it wasn't, Wilson stated. No, I've assisted on dozens of similar procedures. This should have been straightforward. But Olson made critical errors in judgment. When he nicked the spinal cord, he tried to repair it, but made the damage worse. Casey pulled out her phone and showed them a recording, audio from the or captured on her personal device. I started recording when I realized what was happening. I knew someone would try to cover this up. Wilson listened to 18 minutes of surgical catastrophe. Olson's voice was slurred, his instructions contradictory. At one point, he asked for an instrument he'd already been using for 10 minutes. Most damning was his reaction when the damage became apparent. Fuck, this is going to be a problem. Then, clearly addressing the surgical team, what happened here stays in this room. Anyone who talks to reporters or lawyers will find themselves looking for new jobs. The recording was explosive evidence, but Wilson knew it might not be admissible in court. Casey had obtained it through unauthorized means, violating hospital policy and potentially state law. Why are you coming forward now? Lindsay asked. Casey wiped tears from her eyes. Because I have a daughter too. She's 8 years old, and every time I look at her, I think about what that surgeon did to your little girl. I can't live with staying quiet. After Casey left, Wilson and Lindsay sat in their car, processing what they'd learned. "We can destroy him," Lindsay said. "That recording proves everything. It proves Olson was impaired and incompetent. But taking him down won't change what happened to Ashley. So what do you want to do?" Wilson started the engine, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase of his plan. "I want to make sure this never happens to another family. And I want everyone who protected him to pay the price." That night, Wilson expanded his investigation targets. Maurice Melton, the hospital's chief counsel, had enabled Olson's negligence through legal manipulation and cover-ups. Dr. Ernest Lim, despite his friendly demeanor, had referred Ashley to Olson despite knowing about his track record. The hospital's administration had created a culture where profit mattered more than patient safety. But Wilson's primary target remained Dr. Victor Olson himself. The man had stolen Ashley's future through his negligence and arrogance. He'd shown no remorse, no accountability, no recognition of the devastation he'd caused. Wilson began planning Olson's destruction with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to dismantling terrorist networks. The surgeon thought he was protected by money, connections, and institutional power. He was about to learn that some enemies couldn't be bought off or intimidated into silence. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. Wilson's transformation from grieving father to strategic predator accelerated as he uncovered the full scope of corruption surrounding his daughter's case. His military training had taught him that the most effective attacks targeted multiple objectives simultaneously, overwhelming the enemy's ability to respond. He began with financial warfare. Alan Garner's penetration of Portland General's internal systems revealed that Dr. Olson's illegal kickback schemes went far beyond medical devices. The surgeon had been systematically defrauding insurance companies by performing unnecessary procedures, inflating surgical codes to increase reimbursements, and billing for equipment never used. Conservative estimate puts his fraud at $2.3 million over 4 years, Allen reported. But it gets better. He's been hiding the money in offshore accounts through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Wilson smiled grimly. Tax evasion and wire fraud were federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentences. Even a connected surgeon couldn't escape the attention of the IRS and FBI. Working through intermediaries, Wilson began feeding information to federal investigators. Anonymous tips led to inquiries about Olson's financial irregularities. Whistleblower reports, submitted through encrypted channels, detailed the surgeon's kickback schemes. The net was tightening, but Wilson wanted to ensure Olson understood that his comfortable life was collapsing around him. Phase 2 targeted Olson's professional reputation. Wilson created detailed dossiers on each of Olson's malpractice victims, carefully documenting cases that had been sealed or settled with NDAs. Using sophisticated social engineering techniques, he contacted family members and began building relationships. Joan Hammond's son, Brett Hammond, was a firefighter in Seattle who'd never gotten over his mother's death during routine spine surgery. When Wilson reached out as a fellow victim of Olson's negligence, Brett was eager to share his story. "They paid us $850,000 to keep quiet," Brett admitted during a phone call. "But money doesn't bring back your mom. If there's a way to stop him from hurting other people, I'm interested." Randy Brock, the construction worker left partially paralyzed by Olson's surgical errors, was even more direct. "That bastard destroyed my life. Then his lawyers made me sign papers saying I couldn't talk about it. What do you need?" Wilson carefully coordinated with these families to document a pattern of negligence that spanned years. Medical records, expert witness statements, and victim testimonies were compiled into a comprehensive report that painted Olson as a dangerous surgeon protected by institutional corruption. The report was leaked simultaneously to medical journals, patient advocacy groups, and investigative reporters at major newspapers. Wilson's media contacts from his corporate consulting work ensured the story received proper attention. The first article appeared in the Portland Tribune under the headline, "Star Surgeon's Hidden History of Patient Harm." Within 48 hours, the story had been picked up by the Seattle Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and eventually USA Today. Dr. Victor Olson's carefully constructed image began crumbling as details of his covered-up mistakes spread through medical communities and social media. But Wilson wasn't finished. Phase 3 involved personal destruction. Through careful surveillance and digital monitoring, Wilson discovered that Olson was having an affair with Angela Gross, a pharmaceutical sales representative who frequently visited Portland General. The relationship had been ongoing for 2 years, conducted through secret meetings at upscale hotels and disguised business trips. More damaging was Wilson's discovery that Angela Gross's company, MedTech Solutions, was paying Olson substantial consulting fees in exchange for preferential treatment of their products. The affair had evolved into a complex scheme of sexual and financial corruption. Wilson documented the relationship through hotel security footage, credit card records, and intercepted communications. The evidence showed not just marital infidelity, but another layer of professional misconduct that would destroy Olson's marriage and career simultaneously. However, Wilson held this information in reserve. He had learned that the most effective psychological warfare involved letting enemies feel the walls closing in gradually, creating paranoia and desperation that led to self-destructive decisions. The pressure campaign's effects became visible within weeks. Olson's surgical schedule was quietly reduced as hospital administrators tried to minimize liability exposure. Colleagues began avoiding him in hallways and excluding him from department meetings. His wife, Dolores, grew suspicious as news reports mentioned her husband's name in connection with malpractice allegations. Wilson monitored Olson's behavior through multiple channels. The surgeon's alcohol consumption increased dramatically. Murphy's pub receipts showed nearly nightly visits. His hands developed a persistent tremor that colleagues began noticing during procedures. Most satisfying was watching Olson's arrogance transform into desperation. During a chance encounter in the hospital parking garage, Wilson observed Olson loading boxes of personal items into his car, a man preparing for professional exile. The surgeon looked haggard, his expensive suits wrinkled, his typically perfect appearance showing cracks under pressure. But Wilson's campaign had an unexpected consequence. Maurice Melton, the hospital's chief counsel and Olson's father-in-law, recognized that passive defense was failing. If the hospital couldn't protect Olson through legal maneuvering, they needed to eliminate the threat at its source. The counterattack came without warning. Wilson arrived home one evening to find Lindsay in tears, holding a thick envelope of legal documents. "They're suing us," she sobbed. "They say you've been harassing Dr. Olson and spreading false information." Wilson read through the lawsuit with growing admiration for his enemy's boldness. Portland General Hospital, Dr. Victor Olson, and Maurice Melton were seeking $5 million in damages for defamation, harassment, and intentional interference with business relationships. The lawsuit accused Wilson of orchestrating a malicious campaign of character assassination against Dr. Olson, alleging that he'd used his background in military intelligence to conduct illegal surveillance and distribute false information designed to destroy the reputation of an innocent physician. Most cleverly, the lawsuit portrayed Wilson as a dangerous extremist whose obsession with revenge threatened the safety of hospital staff and patients. "They're trying to make you look like the bad guy," Lindsay said. Wilson studied the legal documents with cold appreciation. Melton was skilled. The lawsuit was designed to drain Wilson's financial resources through legal fees while painting him as an unhinged vigilante in public perception. But Melton had made one critical error. He'd escalated the conflict to a level where Wilson's full skill set became relevant. "Let them come," Wilson said quietly. "I've been waiting for this fight." Lindsay looked at her husband with growing concern. The gentle man who'd comforted Ashley through her recovery was disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. "Wilson, I'm scared. Not of them, of what you're becoming." Wilson pulled his wife close, feeling the weight of her fear and his own transformation. "I'm becoming what Ashley needs me to be, what our family needs me to be. And what's that?" Wilson looked out the window at Ashley, who was practicing wheelchair navigation in their driveway, her face set with determination despite the limitations imposed by Olson's negligence. "Someone who doesn't lose," he said simply. The war had officially begun. Chapter 6, Crossing the Line. The lawsuit changed everything. What had been Wilson's private investigation became a public battle, with media attention focused on the grieving father versus prestigious hospital narrative that neither side could fully control. Maurice Melton's legal strategy was sophisticated. Paint Wilson as an unhinged vigilante while positioning Dr. Olson as the victim of a malicious campaign. The hospital's public relations team leaked selective details about Wilson's military background, emphasizing his intelligence training and suggesting he'd gone rogue. War hero turned stalker read one particularly damaging headline in the Portland Business Journal. But Wilson had spent 20 years learning how to fight unconventional warfare against enemies who controlled the narrative. If Melton wanted to escalate, Wilson would show him what escalation really looked like. The first casualty was Melton himself. Alan Garner's digital forensics work revealed that Melton had been systematically destroying evidence related to Olson's malpractice cases. Email servers had been wiped, backup files deleted, and paper records mysteriously lost from secure filing systems. More damaging was the discovery of Melton's communications with state medical board officials. The lawyer had been coordinating with board members to suppress investigations into Olson's conduct, using political connections and campaign contributions to influence regulatory decisions. Wilson leaked this evidence to federal prosecutors investigating healthcare fraud. Obstruction of justice and witness tampering carried serious penalties, even for politically connected lawyers. Within 72 hours of the evidence surfacing, Melton was served with a federal grand jury subpoena. His law license came under review by the State Bar Association. The hospital quietly placed him on administrative leave as the scandal exploded across local media. But Wilson's most devastating strike targeted Olson's personal life. The surgeon's affair with pharmaceutical representative Angela Gross had continued even as professional pressure mounted. Wilson's surveillance revealed that their relationship had become increasingly reckless. Afternoon meetings at downtown hotels, weekend trips disguised as medical conferences, expensive gifts charged to company credit cards. Wilson compiled comprehensive documentation of the affair and its financial implications, then arranged for the evidence to reach Dolores Melton through multiple channels. Hospital security footage of Angela entering Olson's office for private meetings, credit card records showing romantic dinners and jewelry purchases, hotel receipts for rooms booked during supposed solo business trips. The evidence was undeniable, but Wilson's presentation was masterful. Rather than sending everything at once, he allowed Dolores to discover the affair gradually, each revelation building on the last until the full scope of her husband's betrayal became clear. Dolores Melton had stood by her husband through the malpractice allegations, believing his explanations about vindictive families and unfair media coverage. But faced with proof of his infidelity and financial fraud, her loyalty evaporated. The divorce filing was brutal. Dolores's attorney, clearly briefed on the evidence Wilson had provided, sought dissolution of marriage based on financial fraud, professional misconduct, and marital infidelity. The filing demanded full disclosure of Olson's hidden assets and alleged that he'd used marital resources to conduct affairs and bribe colleagues. Most devastating was Dolores's statement to the court. "I can no longer trust the man I married." Recent evidence suggests he has been deceiving not only me, but his patients, colleagues, and the public. "I fear for the safety of anyone under his medical care." The surgeon's world was collapsing systematically. His marriage was ending in public humiliation. His father-in-law faced federal prosecution, and his professional reputation lay in ruins. But Wilson wasn't finished. The final phase required crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Through intermediaries in the hospital's maintenance staff, Wilson gained access to Olson's private office after hours. What he found exceeded his most optimistic expectations. A hidden safe containing false medical records, cash payments from pharmaceutical companies, and most damning of all, video recordings of surgical procedures. Olson had been secretly recording his surgeries, apparently for personal review and training purposes. But the recordings also captured his mistakes, his impairment, and his attempts to cover up complications. The video of Ashley's surgery was devastating. It showed Olsen arriving late and visibly impaired, making the critical errors that had caused her paralysis, then threatening surgical staff to keep quiet about what they'd witnessed. But Wilson found something even more valuable: recordings of other surgeries where patients had died or suffered permanent disability due to Olsen's negligence. Cases that had been settled quietly, families who'd been paid to stay silent, evidence that could expose the full scope of the conspiracy. Wilson faced a moment of moral reckoning. Releasing the videos would destroy Olsen completely, but might also traumatize the families of other victims who try to move past their tragedies. He made the decision that Ashley's future mattered more than protecting people who'd chosen silence. The videos were leaked simultaneously to medical authorities, law enforcement, and investigative journalists. The footage spread through social media within hours, generating outrage that transcended local politics and medical establishment loyalties. Dr. Victor Olsen was arrested at Portland General Hospital while preparing for surgery. The charges included healthcare fraud, assault for operating while impaired, witness tampering, and multiple counts of professional misconduct. The hospital's board of directors held an emergency meeting that resulted in Olsen's immediate termination and the suspension of several administrators who'd enabled his behavior. But Wilson's victory came with unexpected costs. The FBI investigation that had been targeting Olsen expanded to include Wilson's methods. His penetration of hospital computer systems, surveillance of private individuals, and acquisition of protected medical records had all violated federal laws. Agent Stuart Howard, who led the investigation, was a 20-year veteran of white-collar crime prosecution. He recognized Wilson's skills and sympathized with his motives, but the law was clear. "You crossed lines that can't be ignored," Howard explained during their interview at the FBI's Portland office. "What Olsen did to your daughter was criminal, but your methods of exposing him were also criminal." Wilson sat calmly across from the federal agent, showing none of the stress that should have accompanied facing potential prosecution. "Agent Howard, my daughter will never walk again because a drunk surgeon made a mistake and the hospital covered it up. If exposing that truth violated some laws, I'll accept the consequences. You could be looking at serious federal charges: computer fraud, violation of privacy laws, obstruction of justice if we can prove you tamper with evidence. Will those charges prevent Dr. Olsen from hurting other children?" Howard studied Wilson carefully. "Olsen's finished. He'll lose his license, probably serve prison time. The hospital's facing a federal investigation that could result in criminal charges against multiple administrators. Then I accomplished what I set out to do." The interview concluded with Wilson being released pending further investigation. As he left the federal building, he called Ralph Bates to discuss legal strategy. "They might offer a plea deal," Bates suggested. "Cooperation in exchange for reduced charges." "I'm not interested in deals," Wilson replied. "I did what I had to do. Let them prove their case." That evening, Wilson found Ashley in her adapted music room, playing a simplified version of Mozart on a keyboard positioned for wheelchair access. Her technique had evolved to accommodate her limitations, but the music remained beautiful. "Dad, I saw the news about Dr. Olsen on TV. He's going to jail." "It looks that way." Ashley was quiet for a moment, her fingers moving absently over the keys. "Does that make you happy?" Wilson considered the question carefully. "It makes me satisfied that justice was served. But it doesn't change what happened to you." "I know, but maybe it means other kids won't get hurt like I did." Wilson felt a surge of pride in his daughter's resilience and maturity. She'd found a way to see meaning in their struggle that transcended personal revenge. "Maybe it does," he agreed. As Ashley returned to her music, Wilson reflected on the path that had brought them to this point. He destroyed his enemies and exposed a network of corruption that had harmed countless patients. But he'd also violated laws, made powerful enemies, and potentially compromised his family's future. The war was won, but the final battle lay ahead. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. The courthouse steps of Portland's federal building had become a media circus. News vans lined the street as reporters jockeyed for position, waiting for the day's proceedings in what had become known as the Portland General Hospital scandal. Wilson Steele walked through the crowd with the measured pace of a man who'd faced worse odds in foreign battlefields. Beside him, Ralph Bates carried files that contained evidence of the most comprehensive takedown of medical corruption in Oregon's history. 6 months had passed since Dr. Victor Olson's arrest. The surgeon now faced 14 federal charges, including healthcare fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and assault under color of medical authority. His medical license had been permanently revoked, his assets frozen pending criminal and civil proceedings. But Wilson's legal troubles had intensified as well. Federal prosecutors had filed charges related to his methods: computer fraud, violation of privacy laws, and illegal surveillance. The government acknowledged his noble motives, but insisted that vigilante justice couldn't be tolerated. As Wilson entered the courthouse, he passed a familiar figure in the hallway. Dr. Victor Olson, flanked by his legal team, looked like a man who'd aged decades and months. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing, his confident bearing reduced to nervous fidgeting. Their eyes met for a moment. Wilson saw fear, desperation, and the hollow look of a man whose carefully constructed life had been systematically destroyed. Olson quickly looked away, unable to maintain eye contact with the father whose daughter he'd paralyzed. The federal courtroom was packed with victims, journalists, and medical professionals. Judge Randall Holcomb, a no-nonsense jurist with 30 years on the bench, commanded immediate respect as he called the session to order. Today's hearing would determine Wilson's fate. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Van Haney, had offered a plea deal, cooperation with the ongoing investigation in exchange for reduced charges and probation. Wilson had refused, choosing to face trial rather than admit wrongdoing. "Your Honor," Haney began his opening statement, "this case presents a fundamental question about the rule of law. While we sympathize with Mr. Steele's motives, we cannot allow citizens to take justice into their own hands, regardless of the nobility of their cause." Haney outlined Wilson's methods systematically: illegal computer access, unauthorized surveillance, theft of medical records, and witness tampering. The evidence was overwhelming, documented through digital forensics and witness testimony. Mr. Steele used skills learned in military service to wage a private war against Dr. Olson and Portland General Hospital. His actions, while ultimately exposing genuine corruption, violated numerous federal laws designed to protect privacy and due process. Ralph Bates rose for the defense with a different narrative. "Your Honor, Wilson Steele is a father whose 12-year-old daughter was paralyzed by a negligent surgeon. When the medical and legal systems failed to provide justice, he used his unique skills to expose a conspiracy that had harmed dozens of patients over many years." Bates presented evidence of the systematic cover-up that had protected Olson: falsified medical records, suppressed investigations, intimidated witnesses, and financial fraud that had stolen millions from insurance companies and taxpayers. The government speaks of the rule of law, but where was that rule of law when Dr. Olson operated while intoxicated? Where was justice when hospital administrators destroyed evidence of malpractice? Where was due process for the families who were paid to stay silent about preventable tragedies? The hearing's turning point came when Casey Leonard, the surgical nurse who'd witnessed Ashley's operation, took the stand. Her testimony was devastating. Dr. Olson was drunk that morning. I could smell alcohol on his breath, see the tremor in his hands. When I tried to report it, I was told to keep quiet or lose my job. I watched him paralyze that little girl through sheer negligence, then threaten everyone or to cover it up. Under cross-examination, Haney pressed Casey about her illegal recording of the surgery. "Ms. Leonard, you violated hospital policy and state law by recording that procedure without consent." "Yes, sir, I did." "Why did you break the law?" Casey looked directly at Wilson, then at Ashley, who sat in her wheelchair in the gallery. "Because sometimes doing what's right matters more than following rules that protect bad people." The courtroom fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the proceedings. Judge Holcomb called a recess to consider the complex legal and moral issues at stake. During the break, Wilson stepped outside for fresh air and found himself face-to-face with Maurice Melton. The former hospital counsel had been released on bail pending his own federal trial. His political connections and expensive legal team had secured favorable treatment, but his career and reputation were ruined. "Steele," Melton said with bitter hatred, "I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed good people to satisfy your need for revenge." Wilson studied the man who'd threatened his family and enabled years of medical negligence. "Maurice, you destroyed yourselves. I just made sure everyone could see what you really were. Dr. Olson made a mistake. Doctors make mistakes. That doesn't justify what you did. Your son-in-law didn't make a mistake. He got drunk and paralyzed my daughter, then you helped him cover it up. How many other families suffered because you chose to protect him instead of patience?" Melton's face reddened with anger. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're a criminal who used illegal methods to destroy innocent people." "Innocent?" Wilson's voice carried the quiet menace that had once terrified enemy combatants. "Your innocent surgeon is sitting in that courtroom facing 14 felony charges. Your hospital is under federal investigation. You're about to lose your law license and probably go to prison. None of that happened because I'm vindictive. It happened because you were corrupt." Before Melton could respond, court officers called everyone back inside for Judge Holcomb's decision. The judge's ruling was measured and thoughtful. This case presents a conflict between legal procedure and moral justice that challenges our entire system. Mr. Steele violated numerous laws in his pursuit of truth, but that pursuit exposed corruption that had harmed dozens of patients and might have harmed many more. Judge Holcomb paused, studying Wilson carefully. "However, we cannot allow vigilante justice, regardless of noble motives. The rule of law must apply equally to all citizens." Wilson braced for the worst, but the judge continued. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds that while Mr. Steele's methods were illegal, his actions served a compelling public interest that mitigates his culpability. The sentence was unexpected: 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution for damages to Portland General's computer systems. No prison time, no felony conviction that would destroy his business or future. Mr. Steele," Judge Holcomb concluded, "you've exposed serious crimes that might otherwise have continued unchecked. But you must understand that justice cannot depend on individual citizens taking the law into their own hands, no matter how skilled or well-motivated they might be." As Wilson left the courthouse with his family, reporters shouted questions about his reaction to the lenient sentence. "Justice was served," Wilson said simply. "Dr. Olson can never hurt another patient. The hospital's corruption has been exposed. The system that protected negligent doctors has been dismantled. That's what mattered. Do you regret your methods?" a reporter called out. Wilson looked down at Ashley, who smiled up at him from her wheelchair with pride and love. "I regret that it was necessary," he replied. But the day held one final surprise. Chapter 8: The Final Confrontation. 3 days after the federal sentencing, Wilson's phone rang at 3:17 a.m. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something compelled him to answer. Wilson Steele. His voice was alert despite the hour. Military habits die hard. "Mr. Steele, this is Maurice Melton. I need to see you." Wilson sat up in bed, instantly awake. Lindsay stirred beside him, but didn't wake. "It's a little late for social calls, Maurice. Please, it's about Dr. Olson. There's something you need to know." The desperation in Melton's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the arrogant hospital counsel who tried to buy Wilson's silence with a settlement offer. This was a broken man making what sounded like a final plea. "What could you possibly have to say that I'd want to hear?" "He's planning something. Victor's lost everything. His career, his family, his freedom. He blames you for all of it, and he's not thinking rationally." Wilson felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of something?" "Meet me at Riverside Park by the Memorial Fountain. 20 minutes. Come alone." The line went dead. Wilson dressed quickly and left a note for Lindsay explaining he'd gone out for an emergency related to Ashley's case. He didn't want to worry her unnecessarily, but he also couldn't ignore a potential threat to his family. Riverside Park was deserted at 3:40 a.m., shrouded in October fog that drifted off the Willamette River. The memorial fountain stood in the center of a circular plaza dedicated to Portland's war veterans. Wilson found it grimly appropriate. Maurice Melton emerged from the shadows like a ghost. The once powerful attorney looked haggard, his expensive suit replaced by jeans and a windbreaker. His face showed the strain of months under federal investigation. "Thank you for coming," Melton said. "Talk." Melton's laugh was bitter. "No pleasantries? No attempt at civility. You threatened my family and covered up medical malpractice for years. We're past civility. Fair enough." Melton sat heavily on a bench near the fountain. "Victor called me yesterday. He's not well. The divorce, the criminal charges, losing his medical license. It's broken something in him." "Good." "No, not good. Broken people do dangerous things." Melton looked up at Wilson with genuine fear in his eyes. "He keeps talking about how you destroyed his life. Says the only way to balance the scales is to destroy yours." Wilson felt his combat instincts engage. "He threatened Ashley?" "Not directly, but he keeps asking about your family's schedule, where your daughter goes to school, whether she still does physical therapy at the hospital." The threat was clear. Dr. Victor Olson, facing life in prison and the complete destruction of his identity, was considering attacking the innocent child he'd already damaged. "Why are you warning me?" Wilson asked. Melton was quiet for a long moment. "Because I have grandchildren Ashley's age. Because whatever I did wrong, whatever crimes I committed, I can't live with knowing I could have prevented harm to a child and stayed silent." "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He's supposed to be staying with his sister in Seattle while awaiting trial, but he stopped checking in with his probation officer. The FBI has issued a warrant for his arrest." Wilson's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your daughter destroyed my life. Now I destroy hers." The message included a photo of Ashley's school, taken that morning as she arrived for classes. Wilson's blood turned to ice. Olson wasn't just making threats. He was actively stalking Ashley, watching her movements, planning an attack on a paralyzed 12-year-old girl. "Call 911, Wilson ordered Melton. "Tell them there's an active threat against my daughter at Roosevelt Middle School." Wilson was already running toward his car when Melton called after him. "Where are you going?" "To end this." The drive to Ashley's school took 12 minutes at legal speeds. Wilson made it in 7, his military driving training allowing him to navigate empty streets at dangerous velocities while his mind calculated response times and tactical options. Ashley was in danger because of Wilson's actions against Olson. The surgeon, stripped of everything that defined his identity, had chosen to target the innocent victim of his original crime. It was the logic of a broken mind seeking symmetrical revenge. Wilson arrived at Roosevelt Middle School to find police cars surrounding the building. Officers had cordoned off the area and begun evacuating students through the rear exits. The principal was directing traffic while trying to maintain calm among frightened children. Wilson badged his way through the police perimeter using military ID and his relationship with the FBI investigation. Sergeant Casey Leonard, no relation to the surgical nurse, briefed him on the situation. "Armed suspect inside the building, believed to be targeting your daughter specifically. We've evacuated most students, but a few classrooms remain occupied while we clear the building systematically." "Where's Ashley?" "Still inside. Her classroom is in the West Wing, 2nd floor. We're moving carefully to avoid spooking the suspect into violence." Wilson studied the school's layout, his tactical training automatically identifying entry points, sight lines, and potential positions for an armed attacker. The building's design created multiple choke points where Olson could trap victims or officers. "Let me go in," Wilson said. "Absolutely not. You're a civilian, and this is a police matter. I'm former military intelligence with 20 years of experience in high-risk operations. More importantly, I'm the one Olson really wants. If I go in, he might focus on me instead of the children." Sergeant Leonard shook his head. "We have trained negotiators and SWAT teams en route. Standard protocol is to establish communication and resolve this peacefully." Wilson's phone buzzed with another message from Olson. "Daddy's little warrior can't fight anymore. Just like Daddy couldn't protect her from me." The message included a video clip, 30 seconds of Ashley in her wheelchair, moving down a school hallway, Unaware, she was being stalked by a man seeking revenge against her father. "He's inside the building right now. Watching my daughter," Wilson told the sergeant. "Your negotiators don't have time to establish communication. Every minute you wait increases the danger to those children." Wilson didn't wait for permission. He moved toward the school's main entrance with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to walking into dangerous situations. "Steele, stop," Sergeant Leonard called after him. Wilson paused at the entrance. "Call Agent Stuart Howard at the FBI. Tell him Wilson Steele is going in to finish what he started." The school's hallways were eerily quiet, emergency lighting casting long shadows that could hide threats or create false alarms. Wilson moved through the building with practiced stealth, checking corners and listening for sounds that might indicate Olson's position. He found them in Ashley's math classroom on the second floor. Dr. Victor Olson stood near the teacher's desk, holding a pistol with the unsteady grip of someone unfamiliar with firearms. Ashley sat in her wheelchair 20 feet away, surrounded by 6 other students who hadn't been evacuated in time. Their teacher, a young woman named Miss Roberts, stood protectively in front of her students despite her obvious terror. Olson looked like a man who'd lost everything because he had. His expensive surgeon's appearance had been replaced by disheveled clothes and unkempt appearance. His eyes held the wild desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. Wilson stepped into the doorway, making himself visible but maintaining distance to avoid triggering violence. "Hello, Victor." Olson spun toward Wilson's voice, the gun wavering in his grip. "You came. I wasn't sure you would. Let the children go. Your fight is with me. My fight is with her." Olson gestured toward Ashley with the pistol. "She's the reason my life is destroyed. If I hadn't operated on your precious daughter, none of this would have happened." Wilson stepped slowly into the classroom, hands visible but ready to move if an opportunity presented itself. "Ashley didn't destroy your life, Victor. Your choices did that. My choices." Olson's voice cracked with hysteria. "I was a respected surgeon. I had a family, a career, a reputation built over 20 years. Then you came along with your military skills and your obsession with revenge. I exposed what you really were. A drunk who operated on children while impaired. One mistake. One fucking mistake, and you destroyed everything." Ashley spoke for the first time, her young voice carrying surprising strength. "It wasn't a mistake. You were drunk when you paralyzed me. I heard the recording." Olson's attention focused on Ashley with laser intensity. "You ruined my life, little girl. Everything I worked for, everything I built, gone because of you." Wilson saw his opening. While Olson was fixated on Ashley, Wilson moved closer, positioning himself between the gunman and the children. "Victor, look at me," Wilson commanded in the voice he'd once used to control battlefield situations. "You want revenge? Here I am. The man who destroyed your career, ended your marriage, sent you to prison. Let the children go and face me." Olson's gun swung back toward Wilson. "You think I'm stupid? The moment I let them go, SWAT teams will storm this room and kill me. Maybe. But if you hurt those children, especially my daughter, there won't be enough police in Oregon to keep me from hunting you down." The threat was delivered with such cold certainty that Olson actually stepped backward. "You're already finished, Victor," Wilson continued, moving incrementally closer. "Your medical license is gone, your marriage is over, you're facing life in prison. But if you walk out of here without hurting anyone, you might find some way to rebuild." "Rebuild?" Olson laughed bitterly. "I'm 58 years old. My career is destroyed. My family hates me. I'm going to prison. There's nothing left to rebuild. Then what's the point of this? Hurting Ashley won't give you back anything you've lost." Wilson was now close enough to attempt disarming Olson, but the risk to the children was too great. He needed the surgeon to make a mistake or create a better opportunity. That's when Ashley did something that surprised everyone in the room. "Dr. Olson," she said calmly, "I forgive you." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Olson stared at the 12-year-old girl he'd paralyzed, the child whose father had systematically destroyed his life in response. "What did you say?" "I forgive you for what you did to me," Ashley repeated. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me. I know you're sorry, even if you can't say it." Tears began streaming down Olson's face. The gun in his hands trembled as the weight of what he'd done, both in the operating room and in this classroom, finally broke through his defensive rage. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God help me, I'm so sorry." The apology came 18 months too late, but it came from a place of genuine remorse that acknowledged the magnitude of his failures. Wilson saw his moment. While Olson was emotionally overwhelmed, Wilson closed the remaining distance and grabbed for the gun. The two men struggled briefly before Wilson's superior physical conditioning and combat training prevailed. The weapon clattered across the floor as Wilson subdued Olson with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. Police officers flooded into the classroom moments later, securing the scene and ensuring the children were safe. Paramedics checked Ashley and the other students for injuries, finding only psychological trauma that would require time and counseling to heal. As Olson was loaded into an ambulance under police guard, he regained consciousness long enough to look at Wilson one final time. "I really am sorry," he said. Wilson nodded. "I know, but sorry wouldn't give Ashley back the use of her legs. Sorry wouldn't undo the months of fear and anger that had consumed their family. Sorry was just a word that came too late to change anything that mattered." As Wilson held Ashley in the parking lot of Roosevelt Middle School, surrounded by police cars and news vans, he realized that his war against Dr. Victor Olson was finally, truly over. The victory felt as empty as he'd expected it would. Chapter 9. Redemption. 6 months later, Wilson Steele stood before the Oregon State Medical Board as they announced new protocols for monitoring physician conduct and protecting patients from impaired or negligent doctors. Ashley's case had become the catalyst for comprehensive healthcare reform that would prevent similar tragedies throughout the state. Dr. Victor Olson had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for healthcare fraud, along with additional state charges for the school incident. His medical license was permanently revoked, his assets liquidated to pay restitution to victims, his reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of rehabilitation. Maurice Melton received a lighter sentence, 3 years in federal prison and permanent disbarment, in exchange for cooperation with the investigation. His testimony had helped prosecutors uncover the full scope of corruption at Portland General Hospital, leading to criminal charges against 4 administrators and the hospital's loss of federal funding. Portland General itself had been sold to a nonprofit healthcare system after bankruptcy proceedings. The new management implemented strict oversight protocols and patient advocacy programs designed to prevent the kind of systematic cover-ups that had protected Olson for years. But Wilson's focus had shifted from revenge to rebuilding. Ashley's recovery, while physically limited, had been remarkable in other ways. She'd returned to school with a new perspective on resilience and justice that impressed teachers and inspired classmates. Her music had evolved to accommodate her physical limitations, but her talent remained undimmed. "Dad, listen to this," Ashley called from the family room, where a new piano had been positioned for wheelchair access. Wilson paused his work on a legal brief. He'd been serving as a consultant for medical malpractice cases, using his investigative skills to help other families navigate hospital bureaucracies and listen to Ashley's performance. She was playing an original composition, something she'd written during the darkest months of their ordeal. The melody was complex and haunting, capturing pain and healing in ways that words couldn't express. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. I'm calling it the price of truth," Ashley said. "It's about how sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you expect, but it's still worth doing." Wilson felt a surge of pride in his daughter's wisdom and resilience. She'd found meaning in her suffering that transcended bitterness or self-pity. Lindsay entered the room, carrying coffee and wearing the smile that had first captured Wilson's attention in a military hospital years earlier. Their marriage had survived the ordeal stronger than before, tested by crisis, but not broken by it. "How's the Henderson case coming?" she asked, referring to Wilson's current investigation. "Dr. Patterson's been falsifying surgical reports for 3 years. The family should have enough evidence to force the hospital to take action." Wilson's consulting work had become a calling. Families dealing with medical malpractice sought him out for his unique combination of investigative skills and personal understanding of their situation. He'd helped expose 6 negligent doctors and 3 corrupt hospital administrators in the past year. The work was satisfying in ways that corporate cybersecurity had never been. Each successful case meant fewer families would suffer what his had endured. His phone rang. Alan Garner calling from Steel Security Solutions. "Wilson, I've got something you need to see. Remember that tip you gave the FBI about the medical device fraud ring?" Wilson had discovered the conspiracy during his investigation of Olson's kickback schemes. Medical device manufacturers were paying surgeons to implant unnecessary hardware in patient spines, generating millions in fraudulent billings. They made arrests in 7 states, Allen continued. 43 doctors, 12 hospital administrators, and the entire executive team at MedDevice International. The Justice Department is calling it the largest healthcare fraud case in U.S. history. Wilson smiled grimly. What had started as personal vengeance against one negligent surgeon had evolved into a systematic dismantling of medical corruption that reached across the country. Any word on financial recovery for victims? The settlement fund is projected at $1.8 billion. Families who were harmed by unnecessary procedures will finally get compensation. After ending the call, Wilson walked to the window and looked out at their backyard, where Ashley was practicing wheelchair racing techniques with friends from her adaptive sports team. Her laughter carried through the glass, the sound of a child who'd learned to find joy despite limitations imposed by others' failures. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Wilson answered to find Casey Leonard, the surgical nurse whose courage had helped expose Olson's negligence. "Mr. Steele, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I have some news I wanted to share." Casey had become the whistleblower protection advocate for Oregon's Nursing Association, helping healthcare workers report unsafe conditions without fear of retaliation. "Of course, come in." Over coffee in the kitchen, Casey explained her visit. The Portland Tribune wants to do a follow-up story on Ashley's case and its impact on healthcare reform. They're calling it How One Family Changed Medicine in America. Wilson considered the request. Media attention had been a double-edged sword throughout their ordeal, helpful for exposing corruption, but invasive for a family trying to heal. What would they want from us? An interview about the reforms that have been implemented because of what you uncovered. Patient advocacy programs, physician monitoring systems, whistleblower protections. Your investigation didn't just destroy bad doctors. It helped create better systems to protect patients. Ashley rolled into the kitchen, having overheard the conversation. "Can I be in the interview too?" Wilson looked at his daughter with surprise. "Are you sure? It might bring back difficult memories." "Dad, if talking about what happened to me helps protect other kids, then it's worth doing." Her maturity and strength continued to amaze him. Ashley had transformed from victim to advocate, using her experience to help others navigate similar challenges. "Okay," Wilson decided. "We'll do the interview." That evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Wilson reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The price of seeking justice had been higher than expected. Legal troubles, professional risks, emotional trauma that still required ongoing therapy. But the results spoke for themselves. Systemic reforms that would protect countless patients, criminal prosecutions that removed dangerous doctors from practice, and a daughter who'd learned that fighting for what's right sometimes requires sacrificing what's comfortable. "Dad," Ashley said during dessert, "do you ever regret what you did?" Wilson considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system failed so badly that someone like me had to step in. But I don't regret fighting for you and for all the other patients who couldn't fight for themselves, even though you could have gone to prison. Especially because of that. Some things are worth any risk." Lindsay reached across the table to squeeze Wilson's hand. "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" Wilson looked around the table at his family, his brilliant, resilient daughter and his loyal, loving wife, and considered all they'd gained and lost in their fight against medical corruption. "I'm proud," he said finally. "I'm proud that we didn't give up when powerful people tried to silence us. I'm proud that Ashley found the strength to forgive someone who'd hurt her terribly. I'm proud that our struggle meant something beyond personal revenge. Ashley smiled. Mrs. Peterson says I can compete in the state adaptive music competition next month. First place winner gets a scholarship to the summer music program at Juilliard. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Will you come watch me perform? Wilson thought about all the promises he'd made to Ashley that circumstances had forced him to break. Promises about walking, dancing, living a normal life. But this promise he could keep absolutely. I'll be in the front row, he said. The first face you see when you finish. As Ashley returned to her piano practice and Lindsay began cleaning up dinner, Wilson stepped outside onto their back deck. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, but also the inevitability of spring that would follow. His phone buzzed with a text message from Stuart Howard, the FBI agent who'd investigated his methods. Wilson, got another case you might be interested in. Children's Hospital in Sacramento. Potential pattern of surgical negligence being covered up by administration. Interested, Wilson looked through the window at Ashley, whose music filled their home with beauty that transcended the tragedy that had brought it into existence. He thought about other children facing operations with doctors whose competence couldn't be guaranteed, other families who might receive phone calls that would change their lives forever. He typed back, "Send me the details." The war against medical corruption would continue, fought by a father who'd learned that some battles were worth everything, and that victory could take forms you never expected when the fighting began. Inside the house, Ashley's music soared through complex passages that would have challenged her even before her injury. She'd adapted her technique, evolved her approach, found ways to create beauty despite limitations that others had imposed upon her. Wilson still listened to his daughter play and realized that she'd taught him the most important lesson of all. True strength isn't about the battles you win, but about how you choose to rebuild after the war is over. The music continued, filling the night with promise that tomorrow would be better than today. Not because justice had been served, but because love had endured, truth had prevailed, and a little girl had learned to fly even though she could no longer walk. In the end, that was victory enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.